For years, I carried a truth inside me, tucked away like a secret blueprint of my own life. At first, it felt manageable, even rational. We all learn early on that certain things are safer left unsaid, that revealing too much can spark judgment, alienation, or even fear. So, I tucked my confession in the back of my mind, telling myself it was temporary, that someday the timing would be right. But silence has a way of accumulating weight, almost imperceptibly, until it becomes heavier than you can bear. It's like standing under a mountain that grows a little taller every day, and yet you convince yourself that the mountain is just part of the landscape. Every conversation became a careful negotiation. Every laugh, every casual exchange, every interaction carried a hidden tension. Because I was always measuring, always calculating what I could reveal, what I had to conceal. And the strangest part is how exhausting it became. There's an energy cost to silence, a mental toll that's subtle but relentless. It infiltrates your thoughts, seeps into your decisions, and even shapes the way you interact with the world. I was functioning, yes, but I was only a partial version of myself, like a rocket built with half the fuel it needed, spinning through orbit, but never truly breaking free. And it's not just about fear of judgment. Silence has a curious ability to distort reality. When you carry a secret, your mind begins to create scenarios, to anticipate outcomes that may never exist. I found myself rehearsing conversations that might never happen, imagining criticisms that might never be voiced, replaying the what-ifs over and over. It's a strange paradox. The silence is supposed to protect you, but instead, it imprisons you. Every unspoken word becomes a ghost, following you, whispering reminders of what you're holding back. It's exhausting, isolating, and in its own way, corrosive. And yet, the quiet doesn't feel like a choice when you're in the middle of it. You tell yourself that this is discipline, that this is prudence, that the world isn't ready for your truth. But deep down, you know it's more than that. You know that the silence is a cage you built with your own hands. I realized that the more I hid, the less I was living, and the more the world around me became a series of performances, a careful choreography of concealment. My ideas, my feelings, my very identity were being filtered through an unspoken fear. And the longer I stayed silent, the louder that fear became. The turning point, however, is when you finally admit that silence isn't neutral, it's active. By keeping quiet, I wasn't merely avoiding consequences. I was shaping my life around a shadow of myself, a projection of what I thought others would accept. There's a weight to that realization, a sudden gravity that presses down and refuses to let you ignore it. It's uncomfortable, yes, it's even terrifying. But there's also clarity in that moment, a strange kind of liberation. Because when you see the cost of silence laid bare, you understand that nothing external, no judgment, no ridicule, no fleeting comfort, can justify living half a life. And so, I decided that I couldn't carry the weight alone anymore. I couldn't let it define me in private, while the rest of the world experienced only fragments of who I really am. I had to speak. Not because I wanted attention, or because I craved drama, but because the burden of silence had grown too heavy to bear. And the truth, as I finally acknowledged, isn't just about me. It's about the human instinct to release what confines us, to step into the space of authenticity and possibility. Carrying silence is a weight that slowly bends your shoulders, clouds your vision, and quiets the fire inside. But once you decide to stand and speak, even a single word can become the lever that lifts the entire burden, setting everything in motion. And that is when you realize the world is waiting, not for the silence you've carried, but for the voice you've kept hidden all this time. The moment I decided to speak out wasn't dramatic in the way you see in movies, with thunderclaps or spotlighted stages. It was quiet, almost imperceptible at first, like the subtle shift in gravity before a rocket lifts off. I remember sitting with my thoughts, wrestling with every possible outcome, trying to predict the reactions of those I cared about, and realizing, slowly, that predicting the world's response was impossible. I realized that the only thing I could control was the act itself, the choice to stop carrying the weight in silence. That's when it became clear this wasn't about timing or approval or strategy. This was about truth and the courage to finally let it breathe. Speaking your truth is unlike any other act of courage. It's not about bravado, it's about vulnerability. There's a vulnerability that comes with placing your entire self into the hands of people who may not understand, may even reject you. And that vulnerability can feel terrifying. I had rehearsed the words countless times in my mind, each iteration trying to soften the impact, to cushion the blow. But the more I rehearsed, the more I realized that truth cannot be softened without losing its essence. It had to be spoken fully, without apology or dilution, because partial truth is just another form of silence. When I finally opened my mouth, I could feel the tension in the air shift immediately, like a circuit connecting after a long period of disconnection. It was electric, almost disorienting. For the first time in years, I felt unchained, but freedom comes with an immediate reckoning. Eyes widened, breaths paused, and the room became a mirror, reflecting the magnitude of what I had carried alone. And in that reflection, I saw more than reactions. I saw the impact of honesty. Some faces carried disbelief, others confusion, and a few bore the quiet, cautious hope that perhaps, finally, the truth had arrived. What struck me most was that confession isn't just an outward act, it's internal as well. Speaking the truth aloud forces you to confront yourself in a way that silence never does. You feel the pulse of your own convictions, the clarity of your intentions, and the strength of your identity stripped of pretense. It's a rare kind of intimacy with your own being, a confrontation with fear that has been hiding behind layers of hesitation. And in that confrontation, I discovered something unexpected. The act of confessing is less about what others think and more about reclaiming the part of yourself that has been waiting patiently to be recognized. The moment wasn't just transformative, it was catalytic. The ripple effects began almost immediately. Conversations that had once felt impossible became real, and connections that had been strained or distant started to shift. Some people resisted, of course, unable to reconcile their assumptions with the new reality. But others leaned in, curious, compassionate, and ready to engage in the honest dialogue that silence had prevented. It became clear that confession doesn't just release the burden of secrecy. It reshapes the landscape of relationships, creating space for authenticity, understanding, and growth. And yet, the most profound change was internal. The act of speaking, of allowing my truth to exist outside the confines of my mind, ignited a sense of possibility that had been dormant for too long. There's a power in acknowledging your own story, in saying, without hesitation or excuse, "This is me, this is my truth." It's a power that doesn't come from control or persuasion, but from the alignment of self with reality, from the courage to refuse the weight of silence any longer. That day I learned that the confession moment is not simply a disclosure. It is a launch. It propels you forward into uncharted territory, not always comfortable but always real. It is the moment when fear meets determination, when hesitation is replaced by resolve, and when the silent burden transforms into a force that propels you into clarity, authenticity, and possibility. Because in the end, speaking your truth is the moment you reclaim your life, and once you do, nothing, not judgment, not doubt, not fear, can ever hold you back from being fully, unapologetically yourself. The moment my confession left my lips, the world seemed to hold its breath. I had imagined reactions in advance, mapped out every possible scenario in my mind, but nothing could have fully prepared me for the reality of it. The silence that followed was dense, charged, almost tangible, as if everyone in the room was suddenly weighing what they thought they knew against the truth I had just revealed. And in that pause, I realized something fundamental. People don't just react to the words themselves, they react to the courage behind them. The first reactions were a mixture of disbelief and confusion. Eyes widened, brows furrowed, and subtle shifts in posture betrayed the surprise that words alone couldn't capture. Some people instinctively recoiled, retreating into the comfort of assumptions that had guided their understanding for years. Others leaned forward, curiosity tempered with caution, trying to reconcile the new information with what they had known. And then there were the few who smiled gently, with the quiet acknowledgement that they had been waiting for this honesty all along. It was a kaleidoscope of human response, and I found myself observing it with a sense of detached fascination, even as my own heart raced. What struck me most was how immediate an instinctive judgment can be, People have an uncanny ability to reach conclusions in milliseconds, based on their biases, their experiences, their fears. And yet, at the same time, people also have an extraordinary capacity for empathy, for understanding, for recalibration, when confronted with something real and unfiltered. The room became a microcosm of human behavior, resistance, curiosity, fear, hope, all coexisting, colliding, and slowly finding equilibrium. I realized that this was the cost of truth exposure, yes, but also the opportunity for connection in ways that silence could never create. Some reactions were subtle, almost imperceptible. A shift in tone, a pause before a question, a quiet nod. Others were immediate and visceral, a sharp intake of breath, a furrowed brow, an outright exclamation. And each reaction, no matter how small, carried a lesson. I learned that people see truth differently, and that the same words can ripple through a room in 100 different ways, touching hearts, igniting doubts, or opening doors to conversations that had been impossible before. I also learned that silence is never neutral. Once broken, it invites engagement, reflection, and sometimes confrontation. There were moments of tension, of course. Questions came fast and unfiltered, testing the boundaries of my confession, probing for consistency, for motive, for reassurance. But in those moments, I discovered a new kind of resilience. Speaking the truth does not guarantee comfort, but it does guarantee clarity. It forces both the speaker and the listener to confront reality as it is, not as it has been imagined or assumed. And in that confrontation, something remarkable happens. Understanding begins to emerge, not always immediately, but inevitably if patience and honesty guide the exchange. Among the immediate reactions, I also noticed the subtle power of silence itself. Some people didn't respond right away, not out of judgment, but out of processing, absorbing, recalibrating. Their quiet was not resistance, it was thoughtfulness, the sign of minds working through the implications of a reality they hadn't expected. I came to respect that as much as the vocal reactions, because it reminded me that human response is rarely instant, and that truth planted can grow slowly, quietly, until it reshapes perspectives in ways we might never fully witness. And in the midst of it all, I realized something profound. The reactions, whether positive or negative, were secondary to the act itself. Speaking my truth had created a space for authenticity that couldn't be taken back. The discomfort, the shock, the curiosity, the empathy, all of it was proof that honesty has power beyond immediate approval or rejection. It forces life to exist in alignment with reality rather than expectation. It forces us to confront, to connect, and ultimately to evolve. The world may not always respond the way we hope, but once we speak our truth, we step into a force larger than ourselves. Every reaction becomes a testament to the courage it takes to be authentic, and a reminder that change begins not with acceptance, but with the willingness to be seen exactly as we are. And in that realization, I understood that nothing could diminish the power of honesty, for once released, it shapes the world in ways that silence never could. Once the confession was out, and the immediate reactions had settled into a mixture of contemplation, curiosity, and occasional discomfort, I realized that the real transformation was just beginning. It wasn't in the words themselves, or in the shock they caused, or even in the conversations they sparked. It was inside me. There's a subtle but undeniable shift that occurs when you stop carrying the weight of silence, a shift that reshapes not just your perspective, but your very sense of self. Suddenly, the energy that was once spent on concealment becomes available for creation, for exploration, for living more fully than you ever thought possible. I began to notice how different I felt in daily life. Decisions that once seemed paralyzing became clearer. Relationships that had felt strained or distant began to breathe in new ways. Even the way I approached challenges changed, because there was no longer a hidden agenda, no longer a constant calculation of what could be revealed or withheld. I had stepped out of the shadow of my own fear and into the light of possibility, and that shift illuminated aspects of life I had never truly seen before. My ideas, my passions, even my failures took on new meaning, because they were no longer filtered through the lens of sacred. They were real, authentic, and fully mine. There's a profound freedom in aligning your inner truth with your outward actions. I discovered that personal transformation is not about changing who you are. It's It's about removing the barriers you've built around yourself, the walls of doubt, fear, and pretense, so that the person inside can operate without compromise. In the weeks and months after my confession, I noticed a clarity of thought that had been buried under years of careful concealment. My priorities shifted. My creativity expanded. I found myself taking risks I would never have dared before, because I no longer needed the permission of others to validate my choices. And transformation isn't only about the big, visible changes. It's in the small, almost imperceptible shifts, the way you hold your head a little higher, the ease with which you meet someone's gaze, the absence of that gnawing tension in your chest that used to follow you everywhere. I realized that carrying silence had been like living under a constant gravitational pull, and confessing my truth released me from that force. Every action felt lighter, every interaction more honest, and every day offered a sense of expansion that had once seemed impossible. But perhaps the most surprising element of transformation is how it affects your relationship with fear itself. I had always imagined fear as a signal to retreat, to avoid exposure, to protect myself. But once I faced the consequences of speaking my truth, I realized that fear is not the enemy, it's a guide. Fear points to the areas of your life where authenticity matters most, where the stakes are high because the impact is real. Confronting fear, rather than letting it dictate your behavior, became an engine of growth. The same fear that once silenced me now became a measure of where courage could be applied and where transformation could take root. Transformation also reshapes your sense of purpose. When you live authentically, you start to see how your experiences, your insights, and your vulnerabilities can create ripples beyond your own life. What began as a personal confession became a blueprint for the way I approach challenges, relationships, and even projects. I understood that authenticity is contagious. When you align your life with your truth, you inspire others to do the same, not through lectures or persuasion, but simply by existing unapologetically in the world. And so, the personal transformation that followed my confession was not a sudden, spectacular change. It was a gradual, undeniable shift in the way I moved through life. It was the freedom to act without compromise, the clarity to pursue what matters most, and the courage to embrace every challenge, risk, and opportunity with honesty as my foundation. Once you step into your truth, there's no going back. Not because life becomes easier, but because you see it with a new clarity, a new perspective, and a new power to shape it intentionally. Transformation is not a gift from the world. It's a reward for daring to release what confines you, for facing the discomfort of vulnerability, and for stepping fully into who you are meant to be. And in that moment, I realized that the person I had always been, hidden beneath layers of silence, was finally awake, and there was no limit to where I could go from there. When I reflect on my confession, the immediate personal relief and transformation are only part of the story. What surprised me most was the way it rippled outward, far beyond the walls of my own experience. Truth has a way of moving through the world like energy, touching people in ways you can't predict, challenging assumptions, and reshaping perspectives. What begins as a deeply personal act becomes something larger. It becomes a catalyst for reflection, dialogue, and even change in others, whether they realize it or not. I started noticing subtle shifts in the people around me. Friends, colleagues, even casual acquaintances seemed to pause and reconsider their own patterns of silence. Some began to share their own truths, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Others questioned why they had been holding back, why fear or insecurity had kept them from being fully honest in their own lives. In ways I hadn't anticipated, my act of confession became a mirror, reflecting possibilities that others hadn't allowed themselves to see. And that is the power of truth. It does not simply alter your own trajectory, it illuminates potential in everyone around you. On a broader scale, I began to see how our collective tolerance for silence shapes society. We live in a world where conformity, discretion, and the avoidance of discomfort often outweigh authenticity. Institutions, workplaces, even families can thrive on the things left unspoken. But the moment someone speaks, the dynamics shift. Conversations that were previously constrained by assumption or fear become real. Walls of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and even prejudice begin to crack. Every truth spoken creates a new space for dialogue, empathy, and progress. It's a reminder that courage is not just personal, it is inherently communal. There's also a profound lesson in accountability. When you confess, you invite scrutiny, but that scrutiny is not punishment, it's engagement. People respond, they reflect, they challenge, and in doing so, they become participants in your story. The act of being honest requires a readiness to accept that your truth will intersect with the realities of others, and that intersection can be messy, unpredictable, even uncomfortable. But in that messiness lies growth, for both the speaker and the listener. It's the friction of truth against assumption that creates insight, understanding, and change. What I came to understand is that broader implications of confession aren't always visible immediately. Some effects are instantaneous, a changed perspective, a new conversation. But others emerge slowly, over months or years. Sometimes the impact is indirect, influencing decisions, inspiring courage, or reshaping norms without anyone realizing it in the moment. And that's part of what makes speaking your truth so powerful. It's a gift to the future, a contribution that can reverberate in ways that surpass your immediate awareness. I also began to see the transformative potential of collective honesty. Imagine a world where people dared to be transparent about their challenges, their fears, their ideas. Imagine workplaces, communities, and institutions where authenticity is valued over pretense, where curiosity replaces judgment, and where vulnerability is recognized as a strength rather than a liability. That world is not hypothetical. It begins with a single person choosing to speak, to disrupt silence, to demonstrate that truth is worth the risk. And the ripple effect grows exponentially as courage inspires courage and honesty cultivates trust. There's an inherent responsibility in realizing the broader implications of your confession. It's not just about relief, attention, or even personal transformation. It's about recognizing the potential your truth has to shape the environment around you. Every choice, every word, every story shared contributes to the collective narrative of what it means to be human, to be courageous, and to be authentic. When we speak, we give others permission to do the same. We create a space where progress is possible, where innovation and empathy can coexist, and where silence no longer dictates the limits of human potential. Ultimately, the act of revealing your truth is never just about you. It carries consequences, lessons, and possibilities that extend far beyond the self. It reminds us that honesty is contagious, that courage inspires, and that one voice can alter the trajectory of countless others. Speaking up doesn't just release what confines you. It lights a path, challenges assumptions, and ignites change that is larger than any single individual. The ripple of truth, once unleashed, has no bounds, and its impact is only limited by the courage of those willing to speak it. After living through the weight of silence, experiencing the moment of confession, witnessing the reactions of others, and feeling the personal transformation that followed, I've come to realize that none of it matters unless it inspires action. Courage is not simply a private experience, it is a spark that spreads, a force that invites others to examine their own lives, and a call to step beyond comfort zones. Speaking your truth is not a one-time act. It is a practice, a mindset, a commitment to living authentically in every interaction, every decision, every moment. Courage begins with a single choice. It doesn't arrive fully formed or announce itself with fanfare. Often, it is quiet, almost imperceptible, hiding behind hesitation, fear, and doubt. It is the small, persistent voice inside that says, "I will no longer hide." That voice is the starting point of everything meaningful. It is the engine behind progress, innovation, and connection. Every time we act on that voice, we grow stronger, and the world around us shifts, even in ways we cannot immediately see. The truth is, courage requires vulnerability. To be brave is to expose yourself to possibility of misunderstanding, judgment, or failure. And yet, the very act of stepping into vulnerability is what transforms fear into power. When I confessed my truth, I was terrified of the backlash, the gossip, the misinterpretations. But I realized that holding back only prolonged the suffering, not for others, but for myself. Courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about taking action in spite of it. It's about understanding that the discomfort of honesty is far less consuming than the silent weight of what remains unsaid. And there's a multiplier effect in courage. When one person speaks, it encourages another. When one person chooses authenticity over pretense, it signals to others that they can do the same. I've witnessed it countless times. A single confession inspires dialogue, shifts perspective, and ignites a chain reaction that extends far beyond the initial act. The power of one brave choice can reverberate through communities, workplaces, and families, creating an environment where honesty, empathy, and growth become the norm rather than the exception. Courage is contagious because it touches something fundamental in all of us, the need to be seen, understood, and real. Choosing courage also means accepting uncertainty. When you step into authenticity, you cannot predict every outcome. Some people will resist, some will misunderstand, some doors may close, but the alternative, living a life constrained by fear, expectations, or unspoken truths, is far more limiting. Courage liberates you from those invisible chains. It allows you to act decisively, to pursue innovation, to nurture relationships, and to create impact in ways that silence never permits. Every great leap, every meaningful change, every moment of growth begins with this willingness to risk discomfort in pursuit of something larger: truth, integrity, and human potential. I want to challenge you to consider the silences in your own life. What have you avoided saying because of fear? What truths have you deferred because the timing didn't feel right? The reality is that the moment will never feel perfect. Waiting only allows the weight to grow heavier, the internal tension to become more suffocating. Courage demands immediacy, not recklessness, but a conscious decision to act despite uncertainty. It demands that you prioritize authenticity over approval, integrity over convenience, and growth over comfort. Courage is also about leadership, not the kind measured by titles, accolades, or recognition, but the kind defined by influence and example. True leaders speak even when it's risky, act even when it's uncomfortable, and reveal themselves even when the world isn't ready. By doing so, they create pathways for others to follow, they transform environments, and they build cultures where honesty, creativity, and innovation thrive. Courage doesn't just open doors, it creates entire landscapes of possibility. And so, the call is simple yet profound: examine your silences, confront your fears, and step forward into authenticity. Speak the truths that have been hidden, take the actions that have been deferred, and embrace the vulnerability that comes with honesty. The world needs voices that refuse to be silenced, minds that refuse to be constrained, and hearts that refuse to compromise their integrity. Each act of courage, no matter how small, ripples outward, shaping the future in ways you may never fully see, but which are undeniable in their impact. The moment to act is now. Every truth you hold, every fear you confront, every step into authenticity strengthens not only yourself, but everyone around you. Courage is not a luxury. It is a necessity. And when you finally decide to speak, to act, to live openly and boldly, you realize that the only real limits in life are the ones you accept silently. Step forward and watch how the world begins to move with you.